All right. Again, good afternoon and welcome all. As the title of this talk is talking about CornSorb technology, what I'm going to try and do in the next probably about 45 minutes is give you a look behind the curtain and what is involved in this new technology that we're using for multiple purposes. Obviously, we have it in our adjuvant system, as you can see on the left-hand side with our Class Act NG formulation. But we also have formulated that into foliar micronutrition products. And after we get done with the discussion here today, I think you'll have a little bit better insight into what makes this unique technology so nice to work with when we're talking about post-emergence application of either herbicide, insecticide, fungicides, or foliar nutrition products as we look at the micronutrient lineup on the max in side, if you will. So let's go ahead and take a look at what we're talking about here. All right, my screen's froze. There we go. Okay, so let's talk about application technology. So many of you have probably heard me talk in the past when we've done some of the applicator training sessions talking about application technology. And application technology is a base set of tools that we utilize to help improve the performance of the pesticides that we put in our spray tank and then deliver to our targets. It's not any one thing, it's using all of those tools together to improve that performance. And in some cases, we can take older technology, a lot of the off-patent strategy products that have come back onto the marketplace. These are older products, and we can breathe new life into them by coupling them with, in some cases, better adjuvant technology that increases either wettability of the leaf surface, increases penetration into the tissues, or some other characteristic that will help enhance the performance of those given pesticides or foliar nutrition products. So one of the things I always ask when we go out to spray is what's my goal? What am I trying to do? And this is a very busy slide here. When we start to take a look at what it is, we've taken a cross section of our leaf over here and we've blown it up as if we're looking at it through a microscope to give you an inside look at the living portion of the plant. And when we're going out and making our applications to this target, post-emergence, whether we're spraying pesticides or foliar nutrition products, we have to ask ourselves, what is our goal? If I'm spraying a fungicide, for example, my goal is to get thorough coverage of the leaf surface. Cover this entire leaf, if you will. Why do I need to get thorough coverage? Well, none of our fungicides that we use are truly systemic. Yes, I understand that we have some of them that will move from the upper surface of the leaf up here through the living tissue to that lower leaf surface. That's called translaminar movement. And some of our newer strobilurin chemistries will actually do that. But they don't move outside of that leaf or don't move outside very effectively. So for good control, we have to get thorough coverage. So that is my goal when I spray that fungicide. Same thing can be said when we're spraying some of the herbicides, when we look at contact type herbicides. So if you look at, for example, in the small grain market, products like bromoxynil, or if you look at the burn down materials like paraquat, those are all contact, meaning that they don't move very deeply into the tissues. They do all of their work typically at the surface level. So coverage, just like when we're spraying a fungicide, is important for getting good control. But then we move to this other class, and I'll use glyphosate or Roundup as the poster child to talk about these. These products are applied to the leaf surface, but they don't do their work on the surface. They have to get inside the plant and move to the living portion of that plant where new cell division is occurring. And then they do that work. So that means they have to get through this upper barrier, move into that plant, and then figure out some mechanism to move to where those new cells are being formed and developing. To get it inside is a different goal than just to get it on. Now we need to look at how that product is formulated. And if you look at glyphosate, many of our formulations of glyphosate are formulated as a salt. So they're water-based. And typically what happens when you put water on a waxy leaf surface, that water tends to want to bead up. If it has a slope to it, it tends to want to roll off. So our challenge is one of retention of the droplet on the leaf surface. If we put a wetting agent in, a non-ionic surfactant, for example, like a Villa 51, that wetting agent causes that droplet now to spread on the leaf surface and give that material that's dissolved in the water a chance to work its way into the plant more effectively. So now we've retained it, and then the chemistry has an opportunity to move inside the plant. But one of the things that we're going to talk about that makes the CornSorb technology so unique is the ability of it to take it from the surface of the leaf up here and actually pull it inside the living portion of the plant where it needs to do its job. And I'm going to share some data with you that will reinforce that. So if you take a look at CornSorb technology, we call this, it's the next step in moving up the food chain on application technology. The greatest value that we derive from the addition of the CornSorb technology is that it allows us to drive more active ingredient into that plant than what we were doing before the CornSorb technology was introduced into the spray tank. What does this tool do? And this is a key slide because these are the main attributes that CornSorb technology brings to the formulations where we incorporate that. Number one, we get better adhesion of the droplet to the leaf. Adhesion, simply a $12 word, meaning it sticks to the plant more effectively. And I'll tell you why here in just a second. Second, it adds humectancy. And again, humectancy is a very key item that we look at. Humectancy is keeping the droplet as a liquid for a longer period of time on the leaf surface. And there's a direct correlation to how long that droplet stays as a liquid and that droplet's ability to transfer the chemistry that's inside the liquid into the plant effectively. Third, we can increase the rate of pesticide uptake or drive more into the plant in a shorter period of time than what we would do without the CornSorb technology. With products like glyphosate, we can shorten that rain fast period when we add CornSorb technology to the spray tank. So typically, if you look at the Transorb formulation of glyphosate, Monsanto, when they brought that to the marketplace, saw the value of that, excuse me, increased humectant period and being able to drive more into the tissues. So they formulated a different surfactant system in there, and they also changed their rain fast period. They went to a 1 hour rain fast with that formulation of glyphosate. Very similar to what we see with the CornSorb technology. If we introduce it into foliar nutrition products, we also change the uptake rate of those foliar nutrition products. If you look at zinc, manganese, boron, copper, all of those significantly increase the level of uptake of those micronutrient products. Our outcome is better efficacy. So when we're spraying a pesticide, if we're going after weeds, it does a better job of controlling that target weed as long as we don't have resistance in that population. Same thing with insecticides. We can also throw fungicides into that grouping as well because we get better wettability of the leaf, better retention on the leaf, and ultimately better control of the different pathogens that we're going after. In the end, this leads to better plant performance, or another way of saying that, we can actually affect yield when we do all of these things in a better fashion. So let's take a look at behind the curtain at what makes that CornSorb technology so unique. So to start with, this is the original patent. A fellow by the name of Donald Penner at Michigan State University had been working with many different sources of sugar. So talking about sugars, it would be stuff like sorbitol, mannitol, fructose, etc. And what they do in enhancing particularly herbicide uptake. So that's kind of where his research work revolved around. And he's settled in on fructose as being the one that had the most effect on pesticide uptake. And he was granted a patent way back in 1999. Now, luckily for us, he had one of his postdoc graduate students who subsequently came to work for us, was also involved in that project. So we had some very close connections with Doc Penner. And we were able to get exclusive licensing to his technology to begin the story of CornSorb technology. So as it looks today, Winfield holds both the trademark and branding registrations globally for CornSorb. Michigan State University holds the original patent for use on crop protection products specifically. You'll notice 1999, and of course in the rules of patenting, that gives us 21 years of protection. That's here in the US. We've done a few things to extend that, so it's still patent protected here in the US. And then one of the ways that we take products outside of the US is we actually apply for patents in countries that we're taking it to. So we have patent in South Africa, patent in Australia, patent in Brazil, also a patent in Canada, where this CornSorb technology is being sold, and all those are relatively new. They were granted within the last 3 to 4 years. So it's still technology that is novel, new, distinct in what it does, and we're able to protect that intellectual property. Second component of that patent actually belongs to Winfield, and this was granted in 2003. This is the patent that covers the formulation that we're using in our Maxion micronutrient technology, specifically for delivering foliar micronutrients to the plant. Both of them are dovetailed off of the same base, but 2 different usages. Thus, we were able to get a second patent on that particular technology. So what is it? Okay, this slide right here details the key components that we look at in the CornSorb technology. The first one is basically corn syrup. Same thing that gets utilized in the beverage industry in the US. It would mimic what you see in other parts of the world that uses sugarcane sugar in the beverage industry, but fructose corn syrup has some unique properties. Number one, it is a very good humectant. When you mix it with water, it will keep that droplet of water on a leaf wetter for a longer period of time during an evaporation environment. Given that chemistry that you dissolve in there, more time to get into the plant. And one of the key things that we keep looking at is if we relate it back to glyphosate, once that liquid dries on a leaf surface, if glyphosate was in there and it did not get into the plant, once it dries, that glyphosate is no longer herbicidally active. Even if we re-wet that leaf, the glyphosate component doesn't act like a weed control product anymore. So you have one shot to get it done and get it done right. The second component, and this one is a fairly unique molecule. The abbreviation for this one is APG, archaeal polyglucoside. These are very unique molecules that are used throughout the cosmetic industry as organic surfactants. It's only in recent years that we've started to use this material in our crop protection business. These are natural surfactants, meaning they give wettability, spreadability. But what makes them unique is that they can, specifically with positively charged molecules, they can increase uptake into the living portion of plants when it's formulated in with the pesticide application. Simple thing that we can call these are a type of sugar because most of these are derived from glucose, sugar with a carbon tail. And what makes them very different is the both ends, the head and the tail, have different polarities. One, the head, really likes water, so it's attracted to water and it's able to bury its head in the water and hold and stay there. The tail, on the other hand, is what we call hydrophilic, or it does not like water. That hydrophilic end has got the ability to latch on to some of these cations, and because of the attraction of the water-loving head, it will move wherever that water goes. And in fact, what it tends to do is enhance uptake into living tissues with that ability, as I stated earlier, to actually pull the things that are attached to that tail into the living plant at a higher rate than what you would see without the addition of the APG into that spray solution. So if we combine the two components, the high fructose corn syrup and the APG, and we do that in our liquid formulations such as Class Act NG, now what you have is that unique combination that we've trademarked as the CornSorb technology, and we're delivering that in the case of Class Act as a water conditioner with a very good wetting agent in it, plus the addition of that APG, which enhances that wettability, and the end result is a formulation that will perform or outperform anything else in the marketplace that is labeled as a water conditioner. How do we know what it does? And some of you have seen this slide in the past. I've shared this as I talk about the CornSorb technology specific to products, is that we worked with a fella at Colorado State University that has the ability to radioactively tag isotopes. In this case, he was tagging glyphosate. And we were doing a lot of adjuvant work with that glyphosate molecule, trying to measure, can we enhance the level of uptake of that glyphosate molecule as we change adjuvant systems or surfactant systems. A busy slide, but this gives you an outlook at some of the data that we were looking at. And obviously there's a lot of them over on the right-hand side that did not perform even as well as just adding ammonium sulfate to the water in the presence of the glyphosate. So I blocked out the names because it really doesn't matter, but you have two very distinctive bars, that blue bar and that nice pink bar. Both of those bars were the same rate of glyphosate, but the addition of CornSorb technology. And as you can see, significantly enhances the amount of glyphosate that is taken up into the plant, as measured over here. And if we do the math on it, it's about 2.5 times greater uptake than what our standard was with ammonium sulfate. So we're taking the same amount of glyphosate, and that plant actually thinks that you applied twice as much. So if you were applying 1 liter per hectare, that plant thinks you just dumped 2 liters per hectare on it. Where this shows up is in number 1, the speed of activity at which you see the glyphosate working. The addition of the CornSorb technology gets it into the plant faster at a higher concentration, so we start to see symptomologies much earlier than you would without the addition. Second, on hard to control weeds, because we're driving more into that tissue, more of that glyphosate is acting on its site of action than what you would see without the addition of the CornSorb technology. So we're seeing better efficacy on harder to control weeds. Caniza would be a perfect example where that shows up. And again, looking at, excuse me, same piece of data that we were looking at earlier, but now just comparing it to the standard, which would be, this is Monsanto's best formulation of glyphosate, plus the introduction of a 2% volume per volume AMS. And this is our concentration in the tissues after 24 hours. If we take the same formulation of the glyphosate and we substitute out the ammonium sulfate and we add the CornSorb technology, in this case, the Class Act NG, we get a very different outcome measured by what's inside the plant. And that's key. I keep coming back to that statement. It's inside the plant, not just on the plant. And once we get it in, now it can do its job. And part of this driving it in faster and at a higher rate is what's giving us all of those visual symptomologies that we're seeing when you make a comparison between a formulation like this with AMS and this one with the CornSorb. If I spray the same target, I'm seeing activity over here 2 to 3 days sooner than what I see here. And if I'm spraying larger or tougher to control weeds, I get control on this side, I get suppression on this side, meaning that some of them will not die. Just a little bit of data, taking a look at some specific weeds, and don't get too hung up on the weeds. Basically, the spectrum that I have here is Amaranthus on the left-hand side, so it's the pigweed family. This happened to be Amaranthus retroflexus, which is redroot pigweed for us. This is flax, so picked flax because flax has a very waxy leaf surface, hard to get into. Sunflower, most all of you know what that sunflower leaf looks like. It's a very coarse, harsh leaf surface with a fair amount of calcium that gets deposited in there. Again, that's a barrier in some cases, but as you can look at the data right here, the addition of good adjuvants did not change much on sunflower, and part of that has to do with the type of leaf. It's a very large leaf, it's a very easy target, retention of the product on there is very easy, so you tend to get good control regardless of adjuvant system. And then, of course, cornleaf. And cornleaf would mimic what we see with the sunflower. It's a very easy target to move stuff into that plant. And this, by the way, this was non-Roundup ready corn, obviously, as it was being applied. And when we look at that control, we get a slight blip when we add the CornSorb, but otherwise not a big deal. But when we go back to these harder to control weeds, one of the things that you notice is that as we move from just the glyphosate by itself to a glyphosate plus a wetting agent like a Villa 51, here in this case Activator 90 is a wetting agent, plus AMS, you get a little blip in control. But when we add the CornSorb technology, we dynamically change the outcome if we take a look at what we're doing on these harder to control weeds. Again, it's driving it into the tissue. Key statement. Other places that it works, so I've been concentrate on glyphosate. Other polar molecules, if you take a look at glufosinate, Liberty, or Ignite, multiple trade names. This is off patent now, so there's many companies that are formulating off patent strategy with this molecule. This is a molecule that has, we treat it as if it has contact action, right? So coverage is important. This is also a polar molecule that does not like poor water quality. So some of the same issues that you have with glyphosate when it does not perform because of either hard water or dirty water with a lot of dissolved solutes in it. Glufosinate also will get reduction in performance when you add it to a tank like that. So water conditioners become important. So the CornSorb technology incorporated into water conditioners can change the way glufosinate is actually going to work. So this has been around for a lot of years. We're starting to see more traits in crops globally. And we've looked at this molecule extensively with our CornSorb technology. And just one quick look at some data. Again, here's our Amaranthus or pigweed family. This is an annual grass group here, the Ceterias. And then here's a mixture of some annual and perennial. There's 4 or 5 species in here. But the key that you want to look at is on the Amaranthus, when I'm looking at glufosinate by itself, works fairly well on young pigweed. So if you're spraying that target and they're less than a beer can in height, you can get fairly decent activity out of that. If I add ammonium sulfate, which the original manufacturer of the glufosinate strongly suggested goes into the spray tank every time you spray it, and in this case we're adding 3.3 kg per hectare, we get a blip up in the level of control. When you start looking at 90% control for any weed control product, that's pretty good. When we switch that over to the CornSorb technology, we get, again, this is a statistical change Just a 3% bump, but it is 3% better. It takes you about as far as you ever could get with glufosinate on Amaranthus control. Now let's take a look at the annual grasses. Okay, so just by itself, not very good control. You kill about half of them. Add AMS, it looks pretty good, but you add the CornSorb technology, and again, this is two components that are giving this big jump in the level of control. One is the natural wetting agents that are in the CornSorb technology. So that APG component, adding that surfactant, that wettability, if you will, is component one. Component two is that ability to stay wet on the leaf a little bit longer. And component three, remember what I said about glufosinate being contact action? We're able to actually pull more glufosinate into the tissues rather than just on the surface of that leaf. And when we do that, we get a more effective kill on the target species when we're spraying glufosinate. And then when you look at the mixed species, this would be mostly annuals, but some perennials, you'll see the same level of activity that we saw with just the Ceteria groups. And again, looking at some broadleaves, this is in the Chenopodiaceae family, Kochia. So this would be related to your lamb's quarter, if you will. This would be the hard to control cousin. All right, here is the lamb's quarter. And if we go from just the glufosinate by itself to glufosinate with CornSorb, we see a nice trend upwards in the level of control. And on the lamb's quarter or Chenopodium, you see a very dramatic change with the CornSorb activity. It's not just AMS, as you can see by the blue bar. These two are very similar. CornSorb technology changes outcome. This is considered a hard to control weed worldwide. In the South African marketplace, this is one that is constantly a challenge, particularly in the Mealy's area. And we can change how the glufosinate works by putting it with a better adjuvant system, in this case, the CornSorb technology or the Class Act NG. Just a couple of visuals to kind of reinforce what we were seeing with the glufosinate as we're spraying it in the bunkie, getting that total vegetation control. And you'll notice that a lot of these weeds that were sprayed were relatively tall. And if you're looking at trying to get control of a lot of these larger weeds, and again, I always use a beer can height weed as an easy target if they're beer can and smaller. These are all beer can and bigger. So this is a tough weed control environment, yet we were able to go in there and get total vegetation control with a single application, which when you're doing these kind of things, once and done is better than twice and still complaining. Just a quick look at the video. Many of you have seen this in the past. We've done a time-lapse video of this is Chenopodium or lamb's quarter. The same rate or same amount of active ingredient was applied both left side and right side. I'm going to stop it right here. You'll notice that after 5 days, if you look at the left-hand side, we're seeing no visual symptomology that you actually sprayed that plant. It still looks normal. It looks healthy. It looks like you probably missed it. Whereas on the Class Act side, we're already starting to see activity. One of the first things that you notice was the plant stopped moving. That's a natural thing that plants do. It's called circadian motion. Day 3, the glyphosate is already starting to affect the plant. Circadian motion stops. By day 5, we're starting to see visible wilting or drooping of the leaf tissue. Starting to see a little bit of dead material starting to show up already. And it just continues to take this plant down. And by day 10, we are dead. And this plant is just starting to show activity. So again, speed of the kill is related to driving it into the plant at a much higher rate than what we saw on the same species with a different formulation being applied. And again, a couple visuals from South Africa, taking a look at some fairly good sized Caniza that was sprayed with glyphosate and the CornSorb technology found in Class Act NG. And we're getting very nice takedown of a very hard to control weed in a size that is hard to control. And you'll notice it's consistent throughout that field. So let's take a look at the second component where the CornSorb technology is being used, and that's in the foliar micronutrition arena. When you take a look at the CornSorb technology, one of the things that we keep coming back to is that CornSorb helps to move stuff into the plant more effectively. It does it with herbicides, does it with fungicides. We get better coverage for insecticides. Why can it not work with micronutrition products? Go back to my leaf again. Ask my question, what is my goal? You know, historically, when we make applications of micronutrients post-emerge, meaning our target is the leaf, whether that's the leaf of soybeans, leaf of mealies, or going into the permanent crops, into citrus, my target is the leaf. Now you have to think about that for a minute. Is your target really the leaf? Okay, so that is the visible target that we see, right? We need to target our leaf, but my ultimate goal is just not the surface of the leaf. All of those micronutrients that we use, when we're applying them as a micronutrient, not as a fungicide. And the only reason I say that is you look at, there's some manganese formulations that are used for disease suppression. There, we're just looking at coverage of the tissue. If we get some into the plant, that's great. So with the goal being to move it from the leaf surface into the plant where it gets utilized. In fact, most of those micronutrients have to get inside the cell because they work at what they call the subcellular level, meaning they're working at some of the components inside that cell, like the mitochondria, which is the powerhouse of the cell. So we've got to take them from outside to inside. And one of the challenges that we've had over the years when we moved from soil application of micronutrients to foliar is getting them from the surface to the inside. We've tried that with different formulations. So for example, sulfate formulations are probably the most common ones that we see in many of our micronutrients. So zinc sulfate, copper sulfate, manganese sulfate, all very common forms that we apply in liquid combinations as a foliar application. The next one that we looked at, excuse me, are the chelated micronutrients. So if you take a look at zinc, probably the poster child for chelation, zinc is a molecule that when you apply it to the soil, tends to have issues with tie-up or fixation with many different components in the soil. Part of it's pH driven, part of it is reaction with other ions within that soil. All of those tend to tie it up. So we chelate that zinc, which gives it protection from tie-up. The root then takes it up, strips off that chelation system, and utilizes the zinc, and it works. If we take that same formulation as a liquid zinc with the EDTA chelation system and apply it to the leaf, that molecule now is so large that it is very, very hard to get it into the plant. So the amount of uptake with the zinc EDTA chelated formulations, foliar applied, is actually less than what we see with the zinc sulfate application. So if we formulate that then with a CornSorb, maybe we can change outcome. Again, going back and reviewing what we're doing, that CornSorb contains the corn syrup, gives us better humectancy. The APG, the head and the tail, remember that tail is so important because now it's able to latch onto those cationic micronutrients as well as boron, which is anionic. And the other thing that it does, which is totally different than most of the other salt formulation micronutrients, meaning those that are formulated with sulfur, is we get much better tank compatibility with these foliar micronutrition products formulated with CornSorb than what we've seen with the older formulation, meaning they can go in the tank with glyphosate, for example, and not fight with the glyphosate, not antagonize the glyphosate, allow glyphosate to do its job, yet deliver zinc in a form that will actually get into the plant. This slide right here is a key slide. So as I talked about earlier, the patent that we got on the formulation used in foliar nutrition products. This was actually the data from the patent submission. And the numbers that you're looking at next to each of the micronutrient elements is the percent increase in uptake compared to the standard formulation that's used for foliar application. So in the case of the boron, that was a real easy one. The boric acid, 10% material, is by far the most common that's used worldwide. Yet we changed that element, which is, by the way, the easiest to drive into the plant. We have a 40% increase in uptake. So that means that we can actually probably go with a slightly lower dose, get a greater effect, drive it into the plant, not just keep it on the leaf surface. Zinc was compared to zinc sulfate, manganese to manganese sulfate, copper was compared to copper sulfate, and of course the sulfur was actually compared to just sulfur. And you'll notice there's a significant increase for all of those elements in the matter of uptake into the plant. And we can also, one of the things that we look at is we can increase rain fastness. You know, you don't always think about that when you're applying foliar micronutrition products, but that does play a role in some environments where you get rain on a fairly regular basis. How do we know what it's doing? So this is some newer technology that we've been playing with. There's a dye called rhodamine that you can apply, and then if you light it up with UV light, it fluoresces or shines, and you can see how deep it gets into the tissue. So what we're looking at here, this is the rhodamine dye applied just with water, and you'll notice that it's just on the surface of the leaf. That's where all of it is staying. None of it has really moved into the leaf. If we apply it with a boric acid, okay, this is the liquid 10% boric acid mixed with water in the rhodamine dye, you'll notice that we get a little bit of movement into the tissues. You start to see a little bit of a halo underneath it, but it looks pretty similar to just the dye by itself. If we formulate it with our new technology in the Maxin boron, look at how we get this fluorescent glow moving through that tissue during the same time frame. We're actually driving it into that tissue at a much more effective pace than what we typically would see without it. And boron's the easiest to move into a tissue. And then again, I just like to throw this one here to show you one of the things that is very interesting about the Maxin technology as we look at CornSorb is, did you notice when this drop hit compared to these two? These two are almost identical. Liquid boron acts almost exactly like water. You'll notice there's not much spreading, okay? Not much spreading here either. But when the Maxin boron hit, number one, it hits and it sticks. Okay, so that's humectancy, number one. Number two, we've got a bit of a spread. That's the APG that's in there. So that natural wetting agent comes into play. So here it's sticking on the tissue, which means that if I have a leaf that's got an angle to it, instead of rolling off, which is what these two will do, this will hit, stick, and transfer the boron into the tissue. So again, some very nice positive additions to a formulation using that CornSorb technology. Okay, and then I talked earlier about tank mix compatibility. So this mess that you see on the slide is some of the stuff that we did as we learned through trial and error how to create foliar micronutrient formulations that will actually play in the tank with glyphosate more effectively and not form sludge, cottage cheese, or silly putty. Now, I like to use these slides because this was real life as we were evolving our Max-In formulations. One of our first formulations that we did for zinc using the early stages of our Max-In technology, when we're still working with how much fructose, how much APG do you actually need to give us this nice compatible mixture that stays as a liquid in the spray tank and still delivers both the glyphosate and the micronutrient to the target effectively. We did this. We plugged full sprayers, full-sized John Deere commercial rigs, completely plugged with silly putty. And if you don't think that's learning the hard way, try talking with a grower that's done that, and you have to explain what happened. So we learned the hard way. We made all of these different messes. And today, the evolution of formulations is to the point where the Max-In formulations we have today, we will say is almost 100% compatible with almost all glyphosate formulations. Now, coming into play with the glyphosate, obviously, if you have hard water or poor water source, you need to make sure you've got the water conditioner in with the glyphosate prior to the addition of the foliar micronutrition products. Because as you're introducing a zinc or a manganese, you got to remember, those are cations, which if they're unbuffered, unconditioned, if you will tend to react with the glyphosate. So that's why we say if you're going to use that combination of glyphosate and Max-In, take and add the class act to that solution. So add that in first, add your glyphosate, add your Max-In last, you're good to go. Again, the CornSorb patent, we talked about that already. In the CornSorb patent on foliar micronutrition, key things, key items, both of them are still in play. This technology is now widely adapted. It's global now. We look at our estimated footprint on the CornSorb technology. So this would include our Class Act brand of water conditioner. This will include our Max-In foliar nutrition line. And then it also will include products like Destinair, our high surfactant oil concentrate, the first of the oils to actually utilize our CornSorb technology to improve performance. We're getting on some 40 million plus hectares every single year. So a lot of utilization. Once people have tried it and seen performance, and I'll come back to that again, they've tried it and they see an improvement in performance of the products they put it with, it becomes one that sells itself. It's one of the reasons why we get so excited about the addition of the CornSorb technology into both the adjuvant systems as well as our foliar micronutrition products, is they add value or they improve the performance of those products compared to not having them in that spray tank. Now, I know this has been fairly quick spin through the discussion on CornSorb technology, and I hope I was able to impart a look behind the curtain as to why that technology has done such a good job working with the main pesticides that are part of our arsenal, and glyphosate, glufosinate, the clethodims also benefit from those, but also we take a look at how they improve products like the fungicide applications, for example, that give us better coverage. Some of you will have heard of the Master Lock formulation, which will soon be registered on permanent crops in South Africa. That also incorporates a lot of the technologies that we just talked about, that CornSorb technology. Interlock, which many of you are very familiar with, also contains that CornSorb technology. So it's got a broad footprint, but what it does is unique in its action, which makes the products that you put it with act differently. In most cases, it improves their performance, whether that be deposition, coverage, penetration, humectancy, rain fastness, a lot of very positive components when we add that CornSorb technology. So I will quit now and open it up for questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Todd. We really appreciate your time and effort in giving this presentation to us today. Really is good to see the advantages that this CornSorb technology brings. I'm going to open the floor for some questions. Please remember that you can ask a question by typing it into the Q&A box, which is on your right-hand side of your screen. So let's give it a minute and let's see any questions that might come through. I've got a question here. What makes the CornSorb tech so different to what is currently available?
That probably was a question that got put in a little bit earlier. So as I went through the discussion and I pointed out what the CornSorb technology brings to the table when you add it into an adjuvant system specifically, that difference in humectancy, meaning keep that droplet as a liquid for a longer period of time, in a dry environment where the temperature is a little bit higher, that becomes a very important component to actually driving pesticides in, especially products like glyphosate. Second component, being able to drive more active ingredient inside the plant. So if you take a look at what the APG component does, it helps pull those active ingredients into that plant at a higher rate than they would if they were just in water. And then third, they work across classes. And what do I mean by that? So they're formulated in oils, like Destinair. They're formulated in water conditioners, the Class Act. They're formulated into what I would call deposition aid products, meaning drift control, so interlock, master lock, which is a combination wetter spreader droplet modifier, again, there, and then foliar micronutrition products. So very broad base in where they will have their action. So unique technology. Thanks, Nolene, for the question.
Is the concept affordable for small-scale farmers?
So this technology works on large scale as well as small scale. And I would unhesitantly recommend, particularly on small scale, the addition of the CornSorb technology when you're making post-emergent spraying. Because one of the challenges that you have on small scale is getting effective control of particularly weeds when you're spraying them the first time, doing it right. I have a saying that I use all of the time when I teach application technology is do it right the first time. Product may cost you a little bit more upfront, but what's more expensive? Doing it once, doing it right, or having to respray one or more times that same target. And obviously that respray is the most expensive mechanism.
So with that, I'd like to say thanks again to everyone. Thank you for your patience. Thank you, Todd, for your time and your presentation. I think it was very informative and we appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thank you all. Thank you.